for Professor Haidt. Professor, whenever you're ready.
All right. Hello, Keenan.
Hi. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, 5 Questions with Professor Jonathan Haidt, hosted by the NYU Alumni Association. My name is Keenan Weaving. I'm a graduating MBA at NYU's Stern School of Business, and I recently had the pleasure of taking John's Work, Wisdom, and Happiness course. This session is being recorded. All attendees are muted, but we invite you to type any questions into the Q&A box, and we'll leave time for Q&A at the end of the session. Today's program features Professor Jonathan Haidt, who is a social psychologist at NYU's Stern School of Business. He co-founded the nonprofit Ethical Systems to help companies improve their ethical cultures, the nonprofit Heterodox Academy to help universities improve their ability to pursue truth, and the Open Mind platform to depolarize communities by helping them understand their differences. Professor Haidt's work centers around applying ideas from social and moral psychology to help important institutions work better. So today I'm going to ask him 5 questions about how to do that, both during and after the current crisis. So Professor Haidt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Keenan.
And I'll kick us off with our first question. So question number 1, you often talk about the concept of anti-fragility, which can apply to individual human beings, but also to more complex systems. Can you briefly describe the concept and then how you think our economic and political systems might rebound from this period?
Sure. So I recently wrote a book. Well, I don't have the nice cover of it, but the Coddling of the American Mind. Maybe you can sort of read it there. And the central idea of it is it's looking at Gen Z and how, well, the generation just younger than you is not doing so well. They're very depressed and anxious and fragile. Because a basic fact about humanity is that we're not fragile, we're actually anti-fragile. We actually need shocks and challenges and setbacks in order to grow. And boy, are we all coming to understand this, because that's what vaccination is. The immune system is anti-fragile. You have to expose it to stuff in order for it to develop antibodies. And the human mind is the same. So this crisis, this pandemic is going to be terrible for young people economically, but it actually might help many of them psychologically. Some adversity in teen years and 20s is sort of the best period in which we tend to grow from adversity. So we can expect growth for a lot of people. Obviously, there will be setbacks as well. But it's a very general concept. It doesn't just apply to the immune system or people. It also applies to companies and countries. Boy, did we botch this response as a country, and not just our country. Many countries did, and the sort of the global scientific system at first. But certain aspects of it, like the scientists really got their act together to share internationally. They were able to get better quickly. Government responses are not getting better quickly. But this tragedy, this pandemic, is going to really make us better for the next one, because there will be more coming, and the next one could be much, much deadlier. So if you keep that idea of anti-fragility in mind, and you realize we don't really make the necessary improvements until we're sort of shocked into it. This shock is going to change people, companies, and countries, often in ways that make them have more capacity to absorb shocks in the future.
Question number 2. Can you touch on multi-level selection and Durkheim's idea of homo duplex? And then would you opine on whether pivotal moments like this one serve to incite our groupishness, our pettiness, or both?
Okay, so this is a really good question, because this is like the deepest idea, the idea I'm most excited about in all of my research, and it's like really hard to explain quickly, but let me give it a try. Human beings evolved by a process, everybody's familiar with evolution. Individuals that outcompete other individuals go on to have more children. That's called individual level selection. That's true for all animals. But there's some animals like bees and ants and wasps and termites that actually evolve at the level of the hive. They evolve all kinds of mechanisms that make them extremely good at cooperating so they can mount group responses. Humans are kind of like that, but also not like that. we have the ability, so I believe we did evolve by a process of multi-level selection. There's always competition among individuals. We are competitive with each other. But we also evolved by a process of group versus group in terms of warfare, holding territory, competing, but also trading and being interested in other groups. And so we have this almost like a slider switch in our minds. When times are good, we feel safe, we become very individualistic. But when we face a common threat, we come together like bees or ants or other ultra-social creatures. So a foreign attack, there's a lot of research, really amazing research showing that if your country was attacked when you were a teenager or in your 20s, you are more cooperative decades later. So a foreign attack really brings us together. Conversely, a pandemic, a plague in the old days, pulls people apart. The accounts from the 16th and 17th centuries of plague in London and elsewhere are really depressing. People are fighting for food, they don't trust each other, they leave people to die. So fortunately, this pandemic is not that either. It's not a foreign attack that will unite us. It's not a plague in which we're starving and we're fighting each other for food. So I think what we're seeing is that the first weeks were much more like, wow, what is happening to us? And the polling confirmed that people felt we're more in this together, and that was for the first few weeks. By mid-April, however, the pandemic itself had been absorbed into our long-running culture war. And the issue of how serious is it? Is it just the flu? Should I wear a mask? And political entrepreneurs exploiting this so that, unfortunately, by mid-April, whether you're on the left or the right, determined what you believed reality was. And so I think now we're moving into the period where it's dividing us more than it's uniting us, at least at the national level. Now, at the local level, we're still seeing much more signs of goodness. People are basically good. Americans are basically pragmatic people who are good citizens and are kind to each other. So at the local level, I think we're seeing much more good stuff. But in terms of the implications for our country as a whole, I was optimistic at first. Now I'm more on the pessimistic side, especially because we're going into a presidential election. But the problems of our democracy were vast. Things were getting worse and worse. So I am actually somewhat hopeful that over the next several years, this will shock us into changing some things. There are possibilities for us to come out stronger.
Got it. Thank you. So it sounds like you're saying groupishness might increase in the macro, but hopefully we're coming together in our micro communities a little bit more.
Well, the cool thing about multi-level selection as an evolutionary perspective is you don't just say, what is humanity? You say, what are we like at this upper level where we're a country, but then we're states or we're companies or we're political parties. So there's all different ways in which we are either united or competing at the same time. And so keep your eye on that and you'll understand why everything is so scrambled. You have to be more specific about the level you're talking about.
Right. Okay, question number 3. In your book, The Happiness Hypothesis, one of the main ideas is that happiness comes from between. Can you just discuss what that means and then how we might apply that idea to our lives in this moment as parents, as students, and as professionals?
Sure. So my first book was called The Happiness Hypothesis. I surveyed I extracted every psychological claim I could find from the wisdom traditions, East and West, organized them into 10 chapters. The book wasn't really supposed to be about happiness, but it turns out there were some themes through it about the conditions of a good life. And the simplest idea is that happiness comes from getting what you want, but that's not true. When you get what you want, you're sort of relieved, but you're on to the next thing. It doesn't last very long. Many ancient traditions tell us happiness comes from within. Just change yourself. That's what the Stoics, the Buddhists said. Work on yourself. Don't try to change the world. But the conclusion I came to from surveying ancient wisdom and modern psychology is that happiness comes from between. That is, from getting the right relationship between yourself and your work, yourself and other people, and yourself and something larger than yourself. And if you get those 3 conditions right, then you'll thrive. So I find it helpful to think of people not as a machine. We easily think of ourselves or our brains as a machine, but we're not machines. We're more like plants or gardens. We're like ecosystems. And they grow slowly. But if you get the conditions right, and then you're patient, they'll grow in a very healthy way. And so the implications here I think, are especially, you can almost do an audit for yourself or your children or your parents if they're quarantined off somewhere else. What's happening to the relationship between themselves and others? Are they cut off? Well, what can you do to reconnect them? What can you do to have more face-to-face, whether it's by video or standing on the front yard? But if people are deficient in their connection to others, well, you should raise that. A lot of us have our work interrupted. A lot of people can't work at all. A connection between yourself and your work doesn't have to be your main job, but you need a sense of being productive. Most people need a sense that they're doing something productive. And so you can get that if you can't make progress on your main work or your main job. If you can't do that, well, as long as you have a sense that you're making progress on something, acquiring new skills that will pay off at work or in your personal life. So for example, I started running. I used to be on the track team in high school long ago. I started running for exercise, and I was really, I was shocked to discover I couldn't run one lap around Washington Square Park. It's a half mile. I couldn't run a half mile without stopping. Now I'm making progress. I can run one lap without stopping, and then I stop a bit, and I kind of mostly run the second lap. But just the point is, a sense of making progress keeps us engaged. So focus on relationships, something about productivity, and then especially it's powerful to have a sense of purpose, a sense that you are working with others that you respect to do something that matters. So everyone's differently situated. It'll be hard for some people to get those three, but that's my advice. Keep your eye on those three for yourself, your kids, your parents, whatever.
Right, that's great. Congratulations on your lap around the park. Very
It's still
exciting.
pathetic, but it's getting better.
Question number 4. So this may be the first time in a while that we've gotten to see so many of our leaders operate in crisis mode all at once. Can you talk about what types of characteristics speak to our core psychological need for leaders in crisis, and how you think our public perception of ethical leadership might change after this?
Yeah. So, as we had a section on this in our Work, Wisdom, Happiness class. Again, if you take the evolutionary view about how we're often selfish, but we're able to come together, especially in times of crisis, and we actually elect a leader. In fact, the Romans had what they called a dictator. That is, when there was a foreign attack, when they were really in crisis, they would dispense with their quasi-democracy to say, okay, you're in charge. We need somebody to be in charge here. So the idea of, okay, I will cede power to you because we need leadership is very deep. But we're also really afraid of being exploited. We're very savvy about the fact that a lot of leaders are just in it for the power, the self-aggrandizement. And so it's vital that leaders that they are transparent, that they really show in act and in word that it's one for all for one, shared sacrifice. I'm doing this not for me. We're all doing this to keep the company alive. We have an existential threat here. We may not make it, but if we all pull together, and so if it's pay cuts, we all take a pay cut, including me, the leader. So you have to elicit trust. You have to have, boys, there's so many skills that are helpful, and there's so much being written about leadership in this crisis. But having some empathy, showing that you feel for people, all your employees are differently situated. Some of them are doing fine in lockdown. Some are in crisis. So anything you do to show that you're human, flexible, you care, but you have to put the needs of the organization first and show that we're all in this together. I think we are going to have a more of an appreciation of leadership and good leadership from now on. It's always disheartening to me when I see how much attention the newspapers put on the bonuses of the leaders of the top corporations. It's like, really, that's the benchmark of a great leader is how many millions of dollars. So I'm hopeful that a crisis will make us all a little less materialistic, less focused on quantifiable metrics like that, and have a greater appreciation for the difficulties and the beauty of good leadership. Of course, we're all applauding at 7 o'clock at night. We all applaud for the healthcare workers, but I'm beginning to turn my attention to anybody running anything. And, I look at the way the leadership of NYU and the leadership of Stern, we get good communications from them. They're clearly, thank God they're there. Those teams, they're, the leaders in each, Hamilton, and, we got Ragu here in Stern, and they've got, teams underneath them, and they're working round the clock. Of course, the healthcare workers were the front line, but I think as we move to reopening, everybody who is running anything, whether it's a local restaurant or a giant corporation, the complexity of what you have to deal with and the number of people depending on you is so great. So I think we will have a greater appreciation for what it takes to run anything, especially in this difficult time.
Right, I agree. Good to hear on the NYU front. It does seem like a time that everybody is saying the words, we're in this together, but I think I learned from your class, people are hypersensitive to whether you're actually in it together.
Yeah, that's right. And in the country as a whole, it isn't so clear that we're in this together anymore. At least but within many companies, it is. Now, companies that had bad leadership, that had a bad culture, and this is one of the reasons that in this organization I founded here at Stern, Ethical Systems, if you go to ethicalsystems.org, we're so focused on creating a good ethical culture. And the key to that is that there's a sense of trust in management, trust in each other, and also a sense of general fairness, procedural fairness, distributive fairness. If you have a good ethical culture, then it's very easy to convince people, yeah, we are all in this together, and we're all going to have to give, and it's going to be sacrificed, but we'll make it through. Whereas if you go into this without trust, with a sense that this is a deeply unfair and uncaring organization, you are less likely to make it through.
Okay, and question number 5, similar topic. Can you take Stephen Hawking's allegorical idea of the finely tuned clock and apply it to what you see as the future state of liberal democracy in America?
Oh yeah, this is this really cool idea that, our physical universe has like 25 constants in it, like the gravitational constant, things like that. And Hawking and others in the 20th century observed that some of these constants are set at just the right value that matter could coalesce and there could be life. And if some of those settings were off just by a little bit, there would be no matter in the universe and there'd be no life. And so that suggested to some people, hey, like intelligent design, maybe the universe was set, made so that we could have life. And now I don't take any position on that, but it is a metaphor that I've used. Thank you for picking that up in one of my talks. It's a metaphor that I've used to understand liberal democracy. Because if you go back and you look at the founding fathers, and the Federalist Papers and all of their writing before and after they created the Constitution, most democracies before then just flamed out, and they were very aware of that democracy is unstable. There's an amazing quote from, is it Madison or, which one, or John Adams, something about how democracies, direct democracies have ever been as violent in their deaths as they have been, chaotic in their lives, something like that. Democracy is not easy. As a species, I don't think we're very well made for a large secular democracy. Now, clearly we've done it. We did it at many times in our past. It worked very well. We were the envy of the world, so it's possible. But here's my point. It's like if you get the settings just right, you can have a stable, liberal, secular, large democracy. It's possible. But I think we're way out of bounds now. I think a lot of our settings on trust, on our institutions, on our voting, on inequality, on a sense of corruption, our settings are way out of bounds. I think we're in big trouble as a liberal democracy. And not just us. This is a problem in many other countries as well. So I think we need to really make, coming out of this, I think we really need to make having a vibrant democracy in which we trust each other, we trust our institutions, an absolutely vital goal, not just of policy, but of education. I think we need to educate our students and raise our kids to believe, to see that democracy is important and fragile. Now, I grew up in the late 20th century when we thought, hey, we won. Like all those other systems, they failed. Clearly, liberal democracy is the only way to go. But we were wrong. We were fooled because a lot of things were on our side then, and the other systems imploded. But now in the 21st century, it's clear, no, it's not that easy. We can't take it for granted. And so this is something which I really hope will unite people on the left and the right, people who love their country, or just who love the liberal values of tolerance, openness, freedom, which lead to prosperity. So I'm hopeful that will find ways and a well of public spirit to fix what ails our system after this is over in ways that will make our country stronger, better, and a more viable alternative to some of the authoritarian forms of capitalism that are now percolating and developing around the world.
Right. Cool. Okay, so those are our 5 questions. And it looks like we have a few more minutes. So if you don't mind, I'll check in on some of these Q&A questions from the audience.
Sure.
See what we got here.
Let's see, can I see them too? Oh, look at that. There's a chat box there.
Yeah, this is my first time seeing the chat box also.
Okay.
This one's interesting. Love the book. Probably talking about Happiness Hypothesis. Oh, quick plug since you probably won't do it. Excellent book for anyone who hasn't read it. So if you have downtime, The Happiness Hypothesis. Love the book. How has it been managing and supervising free-range kids at the epicenter of the pandemic, especially without having a defined duration before there's an all clear?
Yeah, oh, that is a great question. And you can actually find, so first of all, nobody knows overall. We don't have any good data yet because this is such a new thing. The book referred to here was most likely The Coddling of the American Mind, which was about how the vast overprotection that we put on kids beginning in the 90s. Before then, well, most kids were free range. Even though there was a crime wave when I was growing up, kids went outside and played unsupervised from about the age of 7 or 8. And I've asked this question all over the country. By 3rd grade, 2nd or 3rd grade, kids went out and played. And that ended in the 1990s. We've got vast overprotection, and then they're also on their screens most of the time. So how does the pandemic change things? Well, obviously you're with your parents all the time. That sounds terrible. And you've got a screen all the time now. That sounds terrible. So you'd think that things are going to get really bad. So if you go to letgrow.org, Lenore Skenazy wrote the book Free Range Kids. She and I and others co-founded this organization, Let Grow. Lenore has been surveying parents and collecting stories. And I was just on a call with a high school out in Long Island yesterday. And what a lot of the kids said, these are like 17, 18-year-old kids, they said, I'm less stressed now because before every minute was scheduled. I always had deadlines. And now I actually have some time to think and to make my own decisions. And a lot of them said, well, I'm learning to bake or, I'm learning to code or whatever. So even though all the kids are cooped up with their parents can't supervise their kids 24/7 like they used to. They were always supervised by adults. So I think what we're finding is that in some families, and this would be my advice to anyone who has kids in the elementary, middle school especially, back off as much as you can. Now, of course, if they're just going to be on screens, it doesn't work. But back off, give them more independence. If you can send them outside safely, physically safely, do so. So I think we're seeing a lot of varied outcomes. And it also sounds like social media is a little more positive nowadays than it used to be for the kids. When social media and Instagram especially is all like showing off my perfect life, that's really harmful, especially to girls. Instagram, social media is particularly bad for teen girls. So a lot of things are changing now. Keep your eye on it. But I think there are possibilities for growth and independence here, surprisingly.
Cool. That is a good one. And this one is somewhat related. I think we talked about it a little bit in the class. And it's amazing already. I don't consider myself very old, but you can see very clear differences between people my age and people that are 10 to 20 years younger. So things do change. Given the concept of psychological anti-fragility, which we talked about, what do you think is the best way to productively work with a person that did not receive the benefits of suffering challenges in their formative years?
Oh, yeah, great question, Mike S. So the Coddling the American Mind came out in September of 2018. And we were going to have a chapter in the book on what happens when Gen Z goes to work, in the corporate world especially. But at the time, there wasn't enough evidence because this is the generation that arrived at universities around 2014, and they just began to graduate May of 2018. Well, now here we are 2 years later, 2.5 years later, and now I'm getting this question whenever I talk in a lot of companies that are hiring a lot of Gen Z, and they say, it's like if a light bulb is out, they won't change it. They wait until they're told to change it. So the degree to which new employees, and this is true for the late millennials too, it didn't just suddenly start with birth year 1996, but late millennials and Gen Z have much higher rates of anxiety, fragility, much less sense of autonomy and independence. They've always been told what to do. They've always been told, here's your goal, just do it. So many companies are finding it is hard to incorporate them. It's hard to assimilate them. My advice is, first, talk to them. You have to have the idea of anti-fragility. You've got to explain that idea because they get it. When I talk with Gen Z, and I'm sure others will find this, they're not in denial. They're not defensive. If you say, your generation was overprotected and that's made you more anxious, they don't say, yeah, who are you to, no, they say, yeah, you're right. You're right. What can we do? They want to grow. They want to learn. They want to be able to take on responsibility. So I think what's important is talk to them about anti-fragility and the need for challenge. So I'm not going to hold your hand. I'm going to give you challenges. And if you fail, it's okay. We hired you for a reason. We think you've got a lot of talent. We know you're going to fail a bunch of times. If every time you fail, you learn, then we're getting our money's worth. Then we're happy. So don't be a perfectionist. On the long run, your job is to learn and make yourself the most productive, talented employee you can be. We want that for you. You want that for us in the company. Let's work together. So they are going to need more a sense that you're supporting them. They're going to need more a sense of safety, of an overall safe environment. But it must be done in a context not of protecting you from threats, but of giving you the space to finally expand your wings and grow.
That's great advice. And that line you just said sounded a lot like the most comforting advice that I got going into this summer, which I expected to be challenging. And people who sat me down and said, it's okay if you made mistakes, like you're here for a reason. That was probably the most comforting and kind of like
Right.
the thing that built me up the most. So I think that's great advice. This one's interesting from Pam. Can you speak to the approach of the Western cultures compared to Eastern cultures for building democracy and community?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question. While I'm not an expert on that, I have studied cultural psychology, and many people thought that, well, Western individualism and the heritage of Greece, made something. There's something about Europe that makes it more prone for democracy, whereas East Asia, South Asia, and this is very well established. There's much more a sense of collectivism. The construal of self is more relational. So there are some well-established psychological differences between East and West that should matter for democracy. Now, there are some pretty vibrant democracies now in East Asia. 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't true. But obviously there are some pretty vibrant democracies in East Asia and South Asia. And the democracies of the West are less vibrant now. So I think this is a question which is still being answered. One thing we do know, or I think we see about democracy, it does take a fair amount of social capital, trust in institutions, and places like Singapore. Who else is doing well? Well, Singapore, Taiwan. Well, Singapore doesn't have corruption. That's a great thing. Korea, Taiwan, they have some corruption, but they do seem to have some trust in the competence of their government. So I think what we're now seeing is a kind of a healthy period in which we see there's not one right way to do democracy. And there's not just one, great democracy, us, and everybody else has to copy us. We're in trouble in America and in many European countries too. And I think we actually can really learn from each other. And we see that trust, a sense of community are crucial. And if you go too far on the individualism side, you're in trouble. So I think it's going to be really up to your generation to reinvent democracy, to figure out a kind of democracy that works in the 21st century. I hope you'll be able to look at democracies all over the world to figure out how to get it right.
Big shoes to fill. Okay, let's maybe do one more if you're cool with it.
Sure. Oh yeah, if you can stay on the call for more than yeah. It's been about 29 minutes. Sure, let's go for it.
Yeah, we got an anonymous one here. Do you have an opinion on the change that might need to happen in educational curriculum in order to properly teach these types of ideas of anti-fragility and an appreciation of democracy to younger generations?
Oh my God, yes. So let's start with elementary school. Okay, what is the main way that mammals learn? It's play. That's what we evolved to do, play, okay? So young mammals of all species play a lot. And so especially in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, fourth grade, they need a lot of play. What have we done over the last 30 years? We've said, oh my God, math scores are low. We better have less recess, more math, or whatever it is. So we keep scrunching down time for play in schools. So kids would learn a lot more, especially if they're deficient in social skills and confidence and mental health. So a lot more free play in elementary school, a lot more unsupervised free play. Now it's hard because we're so afraid of lawsuits. We think if a kid gets hurt on a playground, we have to have somebody supervising them all the time, but that impedes growth. So at the early years, we've got to find ways to let kids play more. Again, if you go to letgrow.org, we have ideas about how to do that. Simplest one right here, it's called the Let Grow Project. Every month, the kid comes up with one thing that she can do, that she wants to try to do, that she's never done before. Maybe it's make her own breakfast, or walk the dog, or do the laundry, whatever. So in the early years, we need to be giving them a lot more unsupervised play in groups. That's the most educational thing kids can get. Okay, in later grades, middle school and then into high school, now I think we need more direct instruction in democracy. Play is actually instruction in democracy because you have to work out the rules yourself. My God, people send me photographs. Modern playgrounds, they have like, here's how you play Foursquare. Here are the rules. Like, kids, you don't know how to play games yourself. We're going to tell, like, stop it. Let kids play. Okay, that's indirect instruction in democracy. In middle school, high school, we need to educate for democracy much more directly. And that, I think, a crucial thing is educating in the long philosophical traditions that make up liberalism or progressivism and various forms of conservatism and libertarianism. We need to show all of these, and with a sense of humility, not good and evil. We don't want to be saying, the left is good or the right is good. We want to be saying you have to have people pushing against each other, ideas pushing against each other. You need a kind of a yin and a yang. I didn't learn really anything about conservatives until I was in my 40s, and I took a book off the shelf and started reading about it practically. And that really influenced me when I was writing The Righteous Mind. So I think we need to educate in middle school and high school for democracy, that it is good, prone to certain known flaws. It asks a lot of us. And you have to understand that whatever position you take is never complete. You need the healthy tension with others, and you should treat those others with respect. You don't have to agree with them, but don't demonize them.
Great. I think we're good. So that's it for the program. Professor, thank you very much for giving your time and your perspective. It's always a pleasure being able to hear from you. And to everyone else, thank you for joining, and stay safe out there.
Yeah, thank you, Keenan. What a pleasure it is to be part of the NYU community and the Stern community.
Agreed. Thanks, everyone.